Okay. Welcome. This meeting is now called to order, and the roll has been taken by the clerk. I'd like to remind people of the rules of procedure. This meeting is being held in a hybrid format in accordance with the electronic participation policy for virtual meetings. The full corporate policy 50 regarding electronic or virtual meetings is online and available to review. Staff and delegates participating virtually are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee. All cameras for virtual committee members shall remain on in order to ensure quorum. Members of the committee shall indicate they wish to speak by physically raising their hand. Members who are present in person will be given the first opportunity to speak, followed by virtual participants. All members of the committee will vote by a physical show of hands. Please leave your hand raised until the chair has determined the result of the vote. In the event of a connection or service interruption that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All rules for delegations under the city's procedural bylaw will continue to apply. So item number 2 is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have any conflicts with any item on the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on to item 4.1, notice of intention to demolish an accessory structure at 70 Alfred Street. We have received 2 late delegation requests. So should the committee wish, I will ask if anyone would like to waive the rules to allow these 2 delegations.
Let's shut your mouth. So yes. Tamara's moved the motion in person.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the help and assistance. I appreciate that. Do we have a seconder?
Dan Brown, hand raised.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? See 2. Okay, I declare that carried. So I will ask Mike Temanani and Maze Rasti as applicant to come forward. And as a reminder, you will have 10 minutes inclusive of questions.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm actually overseas and my connection is not the best. I'm just logging in with one of our team members' Zoom here. So I hope you guys can hear me well. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we intend to redevelop the site for student housing, and we've had several site visits to the property. We've heard, multiple complaints from even some of the neighbors where, the property is being used for, putting up fires and, vandalism. And even when we took an engineer there, they mentioned that the structure of the building is not really intact. And there were a couple of concerns also from access standpoint for the redevelopment of the site for student housing. And so we, just given the fact that there was no heritage significance, at least based on some of the information we have, and the fact that we could utilize the property, turn it into a beautiful building for the community, for all the students that do go to Laurier, we figured this could be a great opportunity for the property owner as well as the community in general. But, obviously we like to find out if there's any specific reason why the building should stay Otherwise, we would obviously love to be able to utilize it as part of the development.
Okay, anything else for your presentation then?
I don't know if Mike wants to add any additional comments there. We were in the process of, I mean, depending on how obviously the committee goes and what everyone's thoughts are, if further studies are required to be obtained, we could certainly obtain that as part of the process and provide that to the committee. But in the meantime, we just wanted to hear everyone's thoughts and whether the committee would be open to allowing us to take the building down.
Okay. Any questions for the delegation from members of the committee then?
No, I mean, we don't have any questions.
No, sorry, from committee members
Sorry.
of the delegation.
Speak because they all can't see you.
Someone in the room?
Bev has her hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Bev.
I'm curious as to what your plans are with the existing house that's on the property. And when you say that you're wanting to put in a student residence, can you expand upon that a bit? Are we talking a two-story structure, what's the scope of the work that you're envisioning?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've hired MHBC as our planning firm recently. And based on our last discussion, I was hoping actually Jerry would be able to attend the call today, but unfortunately he wasn't able to attend. But based on my understanding, there's been some obviously changes in the OP as well from a height standpoint. So to be frank, I mean, we haven't finalized our plans yet in terms of the height, the total density that we're planning to move forward with. We are planning to get into conversations with Laurier to understand their requirements. Obviously, we also understand that the affordable housing, student rentals, and apartment buildings are needed. I mean, throughout the GTA and in this specific location as well. And so we're just sort of in that initial preliminary process of investigating the different options we have to make the project not only obviously viable for our investors, the people that are going to be putting capital into it, but also a structure that is feasible for the community. So we're just trying to find that common ground. So I'm not really answering your specific question in terms of, whether it will be a 2, 3, or, what the height limit will be. But I think that's a conversation we wanted to have also after we understood what the committee's thoughts are on these two buildings. Is there any specific reasons why maybe the committee believes that both of these buildings should stay intact, or if there are any flexibility that we would be able to develop the whole site? Obviously, the larger the footprint, the more better options, better looking building we could design and develop, and obviously we'll have to go through the whole site plan process. So obviously, we would work with the staff at the city to ensure the design and the overall look and feel does fit the neighborhood. And if we need to stay with a certain style that would keep the overall integrity of the landscape of the street, as well as the what the overall vision is for that neighborhood, we'd be more than happy to do so. So we don't really have any specific criteria from a design standpoint.
Okay, perfect. I think you've expanded upon that quite elaborately. I want to make sure that there's opportunity for other committee members if they have questions as well. I see Dan Brown. Go ahead.
So your intention is to demolish the house and the accessory building, or just the accessory building?
At this point is the accessory building. We're still doing some investigation to see if we could keep the that building in a sort of where is as is and be able to renovate it.
Okay,
But if there was an option to obviously to be able to demolish that, that would be ideal. If not, we'll work with the existing building.
Anything else, Dan?
no, that's good. Just, I did no research on the house itself, just the accessory building, and I don't think we'd want to talk about the house itself tonight.
Okay. I saw Rob hand first, so we'll go to Rob and then come back to Tamara.
Yes, are you the owner of the property or are you representing the owner?
I'm representing the owner to take the project through the process.
Anything else, Rob? No, that's it.
Well, I just wondered how long the current owner has owned the property.
They've had it for few years. I don't have the exact date on hand right now. I'll be more than happy to get back to you on that.
Okay, Tamara?
Hi, yeah, thank you for coming to us tonight. Is this part of a larger development, like a larger parcel that you've collected? Like how, it's a large building that you're planning on proposing for that area, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've started speaking also with some of the neighbors there, but right now the idea was the development would sit basically on that parking lot. And yeah, and you know, again, depending on how this meeting goes and future obviously correspondence, we would look at the back side as well as the neighbors.
Anything else, Tamara?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so you're focusing closer to Colburn Street for for your student housing. So this accessory building is what is the only one that's really in your way right now? You're not looking at developing the whole block there?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, any other questions from committee members? If not, I will thank the delegation for their time. And Patrick now has his report to come forward with. So Patrick, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for the PowerPoint on the screen. Let's see if this is starting to share it. Okay, there, I think I see it. So this is a staff, just an overview of the notice of intention to demolish that was received for 70 Alfred Street. Next slide, please. Thanks, Lisa. So again, just a quick background. The property is a listed property. It's not designated. The property includes the dwelling at the corner, as well as the accessory structures at the rear. The property was listed in March 2022, and that was part of Part 2, Phase B of the project. Next slide, please. And just for context, a location map. So again, we're at the corner of East Avenue and Alfred Street. The property is shown in the hatching. Colburn Street is to the north. Next slide, please. So I guess as was noted, the application right now, what staff received and what we reviewed on the forms was for the vacant coach house. There was no mention of the dwelling on that form. It said the coach house. So that's what we reviewed for our report. Here's just some contextual shots taken recently from Michelle. Actually went out and took photos of the property. So this is the current state of the accessory building. It was used as a sales office for a used car sales lot. Next slide, please. So with respect to 70 Alfred, the reason this property was listed on the register was that the dwelling predates the incorporation of the city of Brantford, and it was considered representative of the Italian style of architecture. Now, just for the community's benefit and for the applicants, you know, the register project considered the primary buildings on the properties it evaluated. It didn't go looking at accessory structures. So when we look at the criteria for why this was listed, we're looking at the primary building. Next slide, please. So looking at the historic records, we took some excerpts. You'll see these in the report as well, but the 1875 bird's eye map shows the property. We have highlighted the building in red. The yellow arrow is pointing to the approximate location of where the accessory structure would be. Next slide, please. So in 1892, we still see the house at the corner of Alfred and East, or then at that point it was Northumberland Street. The yellow arrow shows what could be this accessory structure. It's not clearly tied to the property, but this could be it. Next slide. And then just on the fire insurance plan from 1919, we do see a building corresponding to that accessory structure, and we see the house at the corner of Alfred and then Northumberland Street. The dashed line suggests that was a different property at the time. So from our perspective, this shows that the accessory structure didn't predate the city of Brantford. It doesn't contribute to that part of 70 Alfred's cultural heritage value in the project. Over time, we can see from this map, a number of buildings would have been demolished to make the car sales lot at Colburn and Alfred. Likely there was some changes of ownership, and eventually these properties could have merged, which gives us the current situation. But when we considered the evaluation, or when ASI evaluated the properties, they were looking at the house at the corner. So next slide, please. The second criteria was the architectural style. We've detailed the features here on the slide about what's typically seen for Italianate properties, and then versus the accessory structure. There's not really a comparison between the structure and the Italian architecture of the dwelling. It's a very functional design, but the accessory structure has been renovated. So we don't really have a clear indication of the facade of design of the building. We see that there were some original windows that have been bricked in or retained, but a lot of bay windows have been later installations. We don't see the same proportions we would have seen if they were original to the building. Pitch roof is not the same as the Italian hip roof, and it's a shorter building overall. So basically staff's position is this accessory structure specifically, which is what we received the application for, doesn't contribute to the property's cultural heritage value. Staff would be recommending that council takes no actions. Basically, the report will be to be received. And then if the house were to be demolished, we would need another application because it was a dwelling. It would be a loss of dwelling units. I don't know the condition of any dwelling units that were there. It is boarded up today, but that's demolition control in addition to notice of intention to demolish a listed property. So that would require a new process. Next slide, please. So just for the purposes of this report and the consideration of the accessory structure, we're recommending that the report be received, but that the committee has a chance to provide any comments it would like to our report to committee of the whole. That will be in January. And that's to meet the 60 days timeline for notices of intention to demolish. Just with respect to some of the claims and just for some context about what our typical process is like. I am aware that Michelle received an inquiry about this property. This property has not been the subject of a recent pre-consultation application. We don't have exact details of what is being proposed. I don't know what status their studies might be. I know there's reference to the structural condition of the building. We haven't seen anything like that as staff. We would be looking for a pre-consultation application to come in to show us what the development proposal is. That's where we as staff give a detailed overview of the required studies. At that stage, we would flag that being a listed property, and because there are adjacent listed properties, we'd want a heritage impact assessment. And we noted in the report, in that case, we would be encouraging that the house be adaptively reused or incorporated into the development in a way that keeps its integrity, its presence. But that doesn't mean that the interior would necessarily have to be fully restored. Given the transition from Colburn Street to the neighborhood, there could be a number of strategies the developer explores. Maybe the house is part of a new building, but we haven't had those discussions. And the way pre-consultation works, it is confidential because it's not something that has been formally submitted like a zoning amendment. So once a zoning amendment might come in, or that, or a site plan, that's where this committee might see a heritage impact assessment. But right now, what we're looking at is the accessory structure, and staff don't have any concerns about the loss of the accessory structure based on the heritage value. So that concludes what I have to say as staff for this file. I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Yeah, thanks for that, Patrick. Any questions for Patrick? I don't see any hands. Oh, Bev, okay. Bev, go ahead.
Patrick, I'm just wondering, what's the property currently zoned as?
Through
And is
the chair, I believe there's at least partial, so it's a combined property with the parking lot to the north. So at least partially zoned for retail. I'm just gonna pull up the city map and see what the zoning is.
so it would seem that a student residence would potentially be compatible with the current zoning? I guess that's my real question.
It's on C3-1, C3-6. C3.
So there's a special exception in play, and that would modify the default C3 zoning. I know in some of our commercial zones, there's an expectation of mixed uses. We are also working on a new zoning bylaw. So depending on the timing, the new zoning may look a bit different and permit a wider array of uses or permit apartment dwellings as of right without mixed uses that could facilitate the student housing. But again, without that pre-consultation, hard to say specifically.
Yep.
That answers your question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Any other question? Oh, I see Councillor Sullivan. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to staff, Patrick, you mentioned that staff has no concerns right now. After hearing the delegate, you now have concerns? Now that he said that he would ideally like to demolish the house too, but would work with it if he had to?
Well, to the chair, to the councillor, that's where we look at the pre-consultation application. And that's where they're really detailing once they have a concept. I'm hoping from hearing the conversation around this committee, they'd look for a way to incorporate the house. But we have, with other files where we have had pre-cons, we would say, okay, you've submitted this proposal. We see you haven't incorporated the listed property or the designated property. And our comments reflect that and say, you really should revise this before you submit something. So
Okay, yeah, because I
we
really
would
do
flag
think
that.
I really do think this is a plan A of a plan B.
Okay. Linda, I see your hand up as well. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just wondering if they do plan to do a multi-story development, is there any consideration that should be required for the houses that are around it for their privacy?
Through the chair, so we do have an urban design guideline document that talks about that interface, and depending on the specific proposal, how they orient it, the planner, the development planner who's assigned to the file will be looking at those things. We may require shadow studies or encourage certain setbacks in design to limit that overlook. It's hard to say specifically, until we see a proposal through pre-con, but yes, it's something we do look for.
That answers your question, Linda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think I see Dan Brown's hand up over there. Go ahead, Dan.
So I know that Brantford's recently learned a lesson with the Crystal Cottage and the property on the corner there, with the developer backing out after so much damage has been done with moving the Crystal Cottage. Not that this is a listed or it's not a designated building, the accessory building. Is there any way to put onto the demolition permit approval that certain things have to be met before that approval is made, so that things aren't done for no reason? Like, I'd hate to see it tore down just because they want to clear the lot and then sell the property. I do know, I've recently driven around there. There's other houses in that block that are boarded up as well. And there must be some way to put something on that permit to say, we will approve it once we see certain things, rather than just approve it and hope that a big plan comes in for the neighborhood.
So through the chair, I can speak to the second part. With listing notices of intention to demolish, there's no conditions. It's simply a notice to the city. If there was a desire to do something, really the course of action is a designation, the full designation process. And as far as this is concerned, this is just the accessory structure. It's not protected by the residential demolition control that you sometimes see come across or come through the committee. Demolition control, the only condition that can be imposed is that a building permit gets issued within a certain time period. There's no other controls available. That's explicit in the Planning Act and the Heritage Act, depending on which process you're using at the time, or both. Really, it would have to be designation, which introduces the demolition controls, introduces the heritage permit requirements, but that would require, further research from the city to create that notice of intention to designate. So at this point, what we are seeing is just the accessory structure, and that's what our comments are based off of.
Okay, Dan?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Rob?
Yes, Patrick, since we're not really sure if the current owner was the same owner when the property was listed in 2022, can you tell me from your records, at the time of the property being listed, was there any objection to the listing voiced by the owner at the time?
So through the chair, I do believe it's the same owner, and I do believe they objected at the time that it was listed. So that, and then just for context for the committee, that objection was presented to the committee at the time, and it also was presented to council for consideration.
Anything else, Rob? Okay. Any last questions for Patrick? Councillor Sullivan, is that your hand again?
Yeah, just one other thing. Can we make it very crystal clear if this is the way we're going? So obviously from the sounds of it, we can't stop this from actually happening. But that make sure that the necessary precautions are put in place to protect the listed property when they're actually just taking down the accessory unit. That's my bigger concern, that something accidentally is going to happen.
Through the chair, that is a comment that the committee can make. That's I believe the next part once the discussion or the questions to me close, and you can provide your comments for consideration at council and committee of the whole. Through the way this will be processed, their demolition permit application could only be for the accessory structure. So that is something where the building department does follow up on the permits they issue.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I think you covered that very, very well. So thanks for all your expertise there. So now we have a motion, and I feel like there are going to be some comments. So perhaps I'll ask that of committee members first. Comments that we want to forward on this. Councillor Sullivan.
Obviously, what I just said, that the necessary precautions are put in place to protect the actual listed property.
Okay, that's a good comment. Any other comments from committee members? Linda, see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Are there any fines that would outweigh the benefit of accidentally demolishing or doing something to the designated building as opposed to just what isn't designated?
That's more of a question.
Sorry, I just
for
wondered
staff.
if the fines would outweigh the benefit.
I know that there's like a legislation, the Ontario Heritage Act, in that there are penalties and fines for violations of the Ontario Heritage Act, and the municipality is tasked with going after people for those fines if they find that a breach has occurred.
And are they actually substantial or something that would not bother?
From what I remember in the act, I'm not a lawyer, not a legal expert, right? But from what I recall, the act says it's a $50,000 fine,
So
up
that's
to
substantial.
$50,000, and potentially jail time, up to 6 months in jail. But that's the limits that I believe the legislation would say. But we're comments. So Councillor Sullivan has his one comment. Is there any other comments from members of the committee? I see Bev's hand up. Go ahead, Bev.
I know we can't make them do this, but like there to be a comment that the proponent consider keeping some of the brick, salvaging it and storing it for potential future use. If the main home requires repair, then they would have the ability to use that brick, even though it's not the same time period. It would be available to them for any restoration work.
And I would suggest as well, like any, and it could be incorporated into whatever development they have on that site as well, right? Whatever proposal they come with could be a interior feature, it could be whatever, right? I think, yes, that's a great comment. Councillor Sullivan, do you have?
Space on the property.
Yeah. Councillor Sullivan, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I just think that we should do what Patrick had mentioned about what's been done in past practice, is that we make sure that we mention that if it is the intent to actually go further and try to seek the demolition of the listed property as well, that this property that we're looking at shouldn't be touched until he's actually filed the whole process.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? I think I see Dan Brown waving his hand there. Thank you for all your enthusiastic waving to help me out.
I believe that there should be follow-up on the existing house to make sure that it is properly secured so that it's not open for people to move in and live in there and have accidentally burn it down. I'm sure that there's standards of boarding it up, but I think that in certain cases, I think that should be followed up to make sure that it is secure.
Okay. Any other comments? I think we're up to 4 now. Rob, is your hand up?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me. I think just in echoing Councillor Sullivan's comments too, the record needs to show that during the course of the presentation, that it was made clear that the future of the listed house is not at all secure, even though this demolition permit pertains to the auxiliary structure.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, do people want to see the comments before we vote on them, or is everyone clear about what the comments are? Okay, everyone's clear. Yeah, okay, good. So then I'll call the, oh, Lisa, did I get a mover and a seconder?
Yeah, we'll need a mover and seconder to begin.
Yes, okay, perfect. I didn't think I did that. So I see Councillor Sullivan moving and a seconder for our comments. I see Tamara, thank you very much. Any further discussion on our comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? I don't think I saw any, so I'll declare that carried. Thank you very much, everyone. We will now move on to 4.2, Notice of Intention to Demolish 25 William Street, a non-designated listed property on the city's Heritage Register. We don't have a delegation for this one, so Patrick, if you want to go ahead with your report, please do.
Thank you, Chair. Right. Thanks, Lisa. This is the overview of the notice of intention to demolish 25 William Street. Next slide, please. 25 William Street is also a non-designated listed property on the city's heritage register. This property was listed on September 20th, 2022, and it was part of Part 2, Phase E of the Heritage Register project. Unlike the prior file, this is the demolition of the primary dwelling on the property. The building was converted to offices for the Red Cross, but previously was known as Lawfield. Next slide, please. So for context, the property is located at the north or northeast corner of Church Street and William Street in the former North Ward of the city. Next slide, please. So this property was listed for three, because it met three criteria. So the dwelling, Lawfield, is a representative example of its architectural style, and it was identified as being Queen Anne, also known as Queen Anne Revival. It's associated with an industrial leader, James Kerr Osborne, who was involved with A. Harris, Son and Company, and that was before it became Massey Harris, and during that time where the two firms merged. And then obviously ultimately that became Massey Ferguson as it continued in Brantford. And the building is also associated with the architectural firm of Smith and Gemmell. Next slide, please. I've truncated the historic records in this slideshow because they're not as ingrained to the property's history. This property does not predate the city of Brantford. So in 1875, we do not see the building in the bird's eye. But in 1892, we do see a representation on the map. We've highlighted that in yellow. So the property was a large-scale mansion. We do see the two gables, sort of almost a horseshoe shape, two cross gables facing church, and one gable facing William Street. Next slide, please. So with this property, the architectural style plays importance. It is the Queen Anne style. It's a very complex and decorative style of architecture. It tends to be larger, 2 to 2.5 stories. It is often asymmetrical, has multiple roof types on one house. The plan, aka the footprint, it tends to be irregular. Stone foundation, brick construction is common. Also wood construction in the exterior is also seen in some cases. We have multiple shingle profiles to add to the design and ornateness. It tends to have prominent towers or corner turrets, and often has multiple balconies, porches, or verandas. In this case, we did see in the fire insurance plans, which we included in the staff report, that there were 2 porches in the past. However, the original porches do seem to have been removed. That was during the Red Cross's ownership, and the use of the building as an office and making an accessible entrance. So what we see with Lawfield is that it does have that complex form and decorative mix of materials. A full list of what was noted is in the staff report, but we see a variety of different styles. There's the clipped gable roof, there's a regular gable roof, so the pointed roof with the flat edge, or the clip, as we see on a few of the roofs, has large ornate chimneys. We see different treatments for different window types, use of stone surrounding the windows. There are rather unique columns at the front entrance on William Street with a more lancet or Gothic style arch. Most of the windows have flat stone lintels or lintels, but then they have brick decorative arches above that. And then even in the 3rd floor, the attic story, we do see a unique treatment for the windows. So there are quite a few design details going on with this building. It does have the 2.5 story height. There is a tail or a part of the building at the rear opposite William Street that was only 2 stories, but that is in keeping with the style. The plan is irregular. While it is a square footprint, we do see the cross gables are not mirrored. They only are on the Church Street side. And there are shed roof projections bays on the other side to the alley. So the plan is somewhat irregular and features a range of styles. The foundation and construction are in keeping with the typical features of Queen Anne, and we do see multiple shingle profiles, square edged slate, and the more hexagonal edge slate. So still quite an ornate building with a lot of its original features. The gable end has some wood trim to make it look more like a Tudor style. So based on that, the project criteria is accurate for this property. It does appear to meet a lot of the criteria for Queen Anne, though it doesn't have the corner turret. It is quite ornate in many other respects. So next slide, please. The next criteria that the project identified was the association of the property with James Kerr Osborne. Doing a quick look at Mr. Osborne's history, I looked at the semi-centennial edition of the Brantford Expositor. He is referenced there as a charter member of the Board of Trade in 1879. About 1872 is when he joined A. Harris, Son and Company. There's reference to him going to Toronto related to the merger of Massey with A. Harris and Son. And it's captured right in the actual document that he built a house at the corner of Church and William Streets at the time of the semi-centennial. It's occupied by Arthur Bixel. So there are other associations with this property beyond just James Kerr Osborne, but that was the criteria, the industrial leader. Any designation research, we would be looking further at the other owners and assigning any further associations there. So we know a postmaster for a time lived at this property. So the association with an industrial leader, that criteria does fit the bill and is accurate. Next slide, please. Lastly was the association with the architecture firm of Smith and Gemmell. There were two James Smiths. So this would be the son, James Avon Smith. But we see in the website the Biographical Dictionary of Architects in Canada from 1800 to 1950, which is updated frequently. There were updates this year. It has a record of the major works of architects in Canada for that time period and where those works were. So in the entry for James Avon Smith, we do see the call out to Brantford, Ontario, a house for James Kerr Osborne at William Street and Church Street, 1880 to 1881. And we see a reference to the Weekly Expositor. There's illustrations and a detailed description. Looking at the inventory, we do have one of these articles referenced. This would be something for further research, but it does track with the criteria that were used for the Heritage Register project. Considering that this is the primary building on the lot that meets 3 criteria and is at least of sufficient integrity, there have been some alterations, but they generally they've been internal, which is something we don't typically look at. And they do seem to correspond to earlier features. So the accessible entrance facing Church Street, the porch, corresponds to a prior porch. So a lot of the integrity of this building remains. It meets 3 criteria. So with respect to this property, staff will be recommending council consider it for designation and will recommend that a notice of intention to designate be issued. This notice of intention to demolish was received late last week. And so we turned this report around to meet the 60-day timeline. If council would go about issuing a notice of intention to designate, a notice would be published in the paper, and that would trigger a 120-day timeline during which the owner can object. The council would have to consider that objection, but ultimately at the 120-day mark, by that point, council would have to issue a designation bylaw, which can be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, or could withdraw that notice. As part of that process, staff would come back to the Heritage Committee with research. We'd also be recommending to council that in addition to that notice of intention to designate, we'd ask for the direction to do research. We'd ask that the committee provide some assistance to staff. We do have some resources that we can call on, but just given the tight turnaround, it would be something tricky to do a full designation research in those 4 months, the 120 days. Now, with respect to this file, talking to the applicant, they weren't able to attend tonight. They claim to have owned the property for about a year, and they've had trouble tenanting the property because it is commercial. It's not residential. It has been converted for some time to be offices. In their view, there has been a lot of commercial office space available, and that's making it hard to retain tenants, and that the building has been vacant. So right now, the ground floor is boarded up. They are, for their submission, considering the use of this property for residential. It would have to be a new development. We have not seen any pre-consultation on this file. In my discussions with the applicant, I did make them aware about the Heritage Grant Programs updates that we discussed at Heritage Committee last month, and that are going to council tomorrow for hopeful ratification. They have, I think, to leave their options open. They have submitted the demolition anyway and would like to proceed, though I did explain, there may be opportunities to adaptively reuse the property. We haven't had a pre-con, so none of these discussions have otherwise happened more than right before this submission. So that concludes my staff presentation. Just for the next slide, we'll just have the recommendation. Is that the report be received and that the committee can provide comments for inclusion in staff's report to committee of the whole. The target, like the last file, will be January committee of the whole and council.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. Questions for Patrick from members of the committee? Okay, I see Bev's hand first. Go ahead, Bev.
Sorry, Patrick, I lost you a bit there. What you were indicating was that staff does not have the time to do an appropriate level of research in order to designate. Is that correct?
Through the chair, we likely, because of this notice of intention to demolish, we will need a quick turnaround. We have 120 days. That would account for also 1 month of that. 30 days is going to be attributed to meeting committee and council deadlines. So we would be asking for help. We have some resources at hand that we can use.
Okay.
But for breadth of research, we'd ask for assistance.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else, Bev?
No.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sullivan, go ahead.
Thank you, Nathan, and through you, Patrick, they mentioned how they wanted to look at residential. Have they not had any conversations at all of converting the house back to residential units?
Through the chair, what I've been told that they are looking at the house and find it difficult to use, but I have not seen any proposals. There has been no pre-consultation with the city that laid out like a unit yield, whether it would be 5, 10, or 50. I'm just saying, for example, we have not seen anything as staff. So I don't know what yield they might be expecting. I also don't know if they're looking at expanding the size of the property down. We've only just received this notice of intention to demolish, and I had the opportunity for 1 phone call.
Okay. I just find a little funny that an owner can't find residential use for the house that was built to be residential. Just seems kind of double-sided. But thank you for your answers, Patrick.
Okay. I see Dan Brown's hand first, and then I'll go to Rob after that.
So the owners have owned the property for about a year, but it's also been up for sale for quite a while. I was lucky enough to go through the house probably 3 or 4 months ago. And it does, not that it has a beautiful staircase in it. And a lot of the original fireplaces are in the house still. Some of the rooms have been turned into offices, but for the most part, it is somewhat original to the structure. And yeah, that's just a comment, I guess.
Okay. Thank you for that information. Go ahead, Rob, with a question if you have one for Patrick.
Yes, during your, I know it's been brief discussion with the owner, and any documentation or application information you've received so far, is there any type of structural deficiency or problem with the building that is pushing this demolition application at all?
Through the chair, nothing in the form of an engineer's report. The letter they provided, and we didn't have time, unfortunately, to attach it to our report. The letter we received indicated at one point someone cut a hose bib and there was basement flooding. I don't know what the result has been. I don't know how finished the basement was or what extent the damage was before it was caught. There were some concerns about the security system and allegedly issues raised by neighbors. And I think there may have been a claim that someone tried to start a fire. I have to find the letter. But nothing like an engineer's report that says these are particular structural concerns that have been documented and that are, jeopardizing the building.
Okay, anything else, Rob?
Well, I'm just concerned that we're considering throwing away decent heritage building stock, that's all. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if there was any documented structural issues that are pushing this or not. And apparently there isn't really.
Okay, Greg?
In the time that I've been on the committee, I've noticed like there's been quite a few houses that are Italianate style, like earlier this evening, or when we were discussing along Mount Pleasant. There's the Brantford cottages. This is the first time I've come across a Queen Anne style, and I'm just wondering, are there many examples of this across Brantford? Like, would we be losing something that's kind of a gem that is would be really hard to replace, obviously, in terms of style?
So through the chair, yes, there are many other examples of Queen Anne, but the styles also range from large scale mansions like you might see along Dufferin Avenue or Lorne Crescent, to more modest, I would say like more middle class buildings of the time that are simpler. They might still feature a prominent corner or various roof lines. This is one of the larger houses, but from a count perspective, just for context, the Register project classified anything with 50 or fewer examples in the city as a rare style, and more than 50 was considered a representative style. So we had more examples of it in the city. I don't have an exact count of the number of properties that were Queen Anne.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I saw Dan Brown's hand up. Oh, Tamara, you haven't gone for it yet, so go ahead if you have something. Go ahead first.
I was gonna say, I was kind of sad when I saw this one come up, so I'm encouraged to see that staff is supporting registering this one as a designated property, so it is a gem. Like, I know that the Red Cross has owned this one for, like, or owned it 80 years. Was it bequeathed from the family? Like, do we know, like, you got it? Was it donated to the Red Cross from the Osborne family? Like,
It states, this is the,
it's kind of significant, you know?
can I?
Yeah.
The 1984 Brant Dufferin area heritage study indicates that the house was sold for a nominal sum to the Red Cross. So
Amazing. Good.
there was generosity there
Yeah.
on behalf of the owner.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay.
They go they'll
Thanks.
say thanks to Bev for that one.
Yeah, Bev's right on it with the answers. Normally that's not something that happens, or something that I normally encourage, but because Bev was right on top of it, I gave her some leeway. Dan, did you have your hand up again?
Yes, I did.
Go
So,
ahead.
Same as the Alfred Street residents, I would like to see somebody to go out to make sure that it's being protected, to be closed in so that, and whether it be the water's turned off, the hydro's turned off, or whatever needs to be done to make sure that that house is also protected until this decision is being made.
So through the chair, just to note, so our property standards group, the bylaw enforcement does look after these vacant buildings. I believe they have a list of vacant properties, and it is currently boarded up. So that would be to deter access into the building.
Okay. I know we're kind of straggling into comments here. I want to try and keep it to questions right now, and then we can get to the comments part after. So Dan, do you have something, another question? No?
Oh, that just, when I went through that property myself, it was not very well secured.
Okay.
That people were getting in.
Yeah. Rob, do you have your hand up for something else? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just again, similar to before, Patrick, during the listing process, any objection from the owner to having the property listed on the register that you're aware of?
Through the chair, I don't recall. I can check the report, but I don't recall a complaint about this property being listed. Let me just check.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I never remember seeing one for this, but Patrick will continue to check in on that. Councillor Sullivan, do you have another question as well?
Yeah, the same lines, but you did say that this person's only had the property for about a year now, right?
That's what I recall from our
Yeah, so
conversation.
this owner obviously wouldn't have had anything to say about it because he wouldn't have been involved with it.
And then Greg, do you have another question?
Yeah, I have another quick question for Patrick about why it was listed but not not whatever that next step is that you're asking for now at the time, considering the size of the house and the history that you've referred to here, why it wasn't done at that when it was listed, why that extra step wasn't taken then.
So through the chair, so the register project just looked at the heritage inventory, unless community groups or individuals added other properties and recommended other properties be looked at. But the register project was just about taking properties that had no protection and listing them, so there would be the notice of intention to demolish. It was always talked about the next step may involve the designations of properties. An exact strategy was never laid out because we were going through, I think, 3 more phases of the register first. But now that the property had been listed with the rest of the recommended properties in this neighborhood, now we're taking it through the next stage that we received the demolition notice.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was an interim, sort of, I guess, a first step, and then we were going to sort of go back and look at the properties more closely.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've peppered Patrick with tons of questions. So I think we're ready to move on to the comment section. We had some very good discussion about this, so I appreciate that. Comments that we want to have. I take it there's going to be a slew. Councillor Sullivan, go ahead.
Yeah, further to what Dan was saying earlier, as we've seen what happened with former Mayor Watt's house, I don't want to see that happen to another heritage house while we're awaiting a process. So, and I know we do have the property standards, but that house went through property standards too, and the owner just went into total violation of those standards. So I think we somehow got to find out or recommend that stricter measures get put in place to make sure that these things stay as they should.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good. Stricter enforcement to ensure that this cultural heritage asset is protected from vandalism, fires, etc. Rob?
I would just say that council should consider upholding their original decision in September of 2022 of recognizing the property as significant enough for listing, and none of that has changed, and that they should consider doing what they can to preserve this property.
Okay. Any other comments suggested from people?
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
I know you have to speak for the owl.
Yeah.
That we do support staff and their recommendation for registering the property.
For the notice of intention to designate?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. Any other comments? Rob?
Just in reference to James Kerr Osborne, he was a significant player in the formation of the Massey Harris empire that started in 1891. He represented the Harris Company interest when the head office was put together in Toronto and sat on the board. So beyond being a local industrial player, as the original owner of the home, he went on to a national stage in that company.
Okay, very good. Any other comments? I have one that I'd like to add with the indulgence of the committee, that we strongly oppose the demolition of this property. Any other comments? So I need a mover and a seconder for the motion and the comments. I see Linda. I also see Cynthia as a seconder. Any further discussion on our comments? See none. Oh, sorry, Bev, go ahead.
Just that the house, a relative of mine owned the Hext house across the street in the early 2000s. And I do recall that there were roof repairs done at that time. So just the point that the house appears to be in generally very good condition. And so to lose a heritage treasure would not be good, given that it's not a compromised structure to begin with, I guess is my.
Okay. Are the mover and seconder friendly with that being added as a comment? I see nods. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Hands down. Any opposed? Seeing none, I will declare that carried. Thank you very much. Moving right along. 4.3, draft terms of reference for heritage impact assessments and heritage conservation plans. Patrick, I'll ask you to come forward and give us an overview of this document you've created.
Thank you, Chair. So for this, I do not have a presentation. These are two text-heavy documents, but just to contextualize what they are. So under the Planning Act, the city adopts an official plan that guides land use and sets out a vision for development within the city. And amongst the other policies that are contained in an official plan, we also have very functional ones that speak to the process when someone wants to develop their property, whether it be an infill development or a 1,000-unit subdivision. The Planning Act gives us the ability to specify documents and studies that we want to see as a municipality to support these planning applications. We tend to call this the list of required studies. You've heard me refer to pre-consultation for the earlier items on the agenda. So we have this list in our official plan. I believe it's section 9.11. Anyone can go online, look at the document, and see the full list of studies that may be required. They're not always required. But in the past, we haven't had detailed City of Brantford guidelines for all of these studies. Some are established through convention. These documents typically contain, or through discussion at a pre-consultation meeting. Now, one of the projects the city's planning department has been working on is a development manual. And that would be a comprehensive document that lays out how the development process would flow in Brantford from application to approval or decision. And then for certain types of application like site plans or subdivisions, there's a conditional approval stage where we say, the city might approve something in principle and say, now go satisfy these conditions to actually implement it and achieve like your building permit stage. So as part of that work, we looked at the list of studies we have in our official plan where we can ask for heritage impact assessments and heritage conservation plans. This committee will see those studies when they're completed. Heritage impact assessments more often than conservation plans. But because we're working on this new manual and we want to create this list of required studies and these details for what we expect out of these studies, we're now creating the detailed guidelines that are Brantford specific. So just for context, in the past, the province, I think around 2001, maybe a little bit later, put out guidelines for heritage impact assessments and conservation plans. That was part of a bigger document called the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. Earlier this year, or late last year, the province put out a new draft, an updated draft of this toolkit. It did not include those same guidelines about what a impact assessment or conservation plan contains. So in the past, we've relied on this and just referred applicants to those existing terms of reference because they're fairly standard across the province. However, they've been taken down. They will be replaced, presumably. They haven't been replaced officially yet, but they're hard to access. So with our development review process, we decided to consider the changes that have been made to the planning process, look for ways the old guidelines might present a challenge, and create new guidelines for applications going forward. So once the development manual is presented to council for endorsement, following that, we would be providing these terms of reference, these guidelines on how to create this document to every applicant when they submit. If you need a heritage impact assessment because you want to develop a property that is listed, here are the requirements for that heritage study. And so we have two components. The heritage impact assessment details the evaluation of the property and considers a development proposal and says, okay, here are the likely impacts that could occur. The conservation plan is that next step. So once we know what the impacts are, we know what the development is, that would be like the detailed step-by-step. Here is what we would expect to see happen to conserve that building. So an example might be a study comes in. If someone's building a 10-story high-rise building, one of the impacts could be shadows. One of the impacts could be vibrations that affect the brick structure. So that would be detailed in the heritage study. The conservation plan would then say, all right, well, if that's a concern, here's how we can mitigate it or how we can monitor the building to see if it's being impacted. I won't go through each policy in these documents, but just the general overview of what we would expect to see. So for a heritage impact assessment, we've laid out the purpose. We've detailed when it would be required, and that's also set out in our official plan. We detail the type of professional who we expect to see preparing this study. So it should be someone who has prior experience evaluating heritage properties. There's a professional association called the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals. Not everyone who does heritage evaluation is a member. They're encouraged to be. But we do allow people to demonstrate that they actually have a direct experience doing this work. And then we detail the contents of the actual study. So they'll introduce the study, the property that's being developed, who the property owner and the proponent is, and who's actually doing the study. They'll give us the context. They will identify the resources. So that could be referring to, the register, this property is listed, or a designation bylaw. They'll do the background research. And then they'll move on to actually evaluating the heritage of the property. We use the Ontario Heritage Act, so we specify for them that they should be using those regulations, just like we would when we're considering designation. We ask them to be clear, reference, and point to the exact document that you're using. So it's not okay to be vague. They're going to have to point to the documents that they're using. And then in the past, what we saw with the provincial guidelines was that a heritage impact assessment was more of almost like it was a peer review. It would look at the proposal, and then it was expected to lay out options that could be considered. And so it was almost like it was a peer review for the city's benefit. What we're seeing with these new timelines is that it's just not feasible to iterate on developments, to get a heritage study from a consultant, from a developer, and then say, your study identifies XYZ issues, but it says you could change your proposal in this way. Oftentimes, you also just saw the study say there were no impacts. So looking at the other terms of reference that other cities have, we tried to make a list of examples of issues, and that are both positive and negative. So here's an example of how, even if something is a new development, here's a positive impact. So, the development proposal is sympathetic. It's scaled, or it's designed to blend in or not be, prominent with respect to that heritage building. Maybe it adaptively reuses the heritage building so that the building is conserved and it still has its original character, even though it has a new use. At the same time, we have the negative impacts are clearly spelled out. We are expecting to see, is this going to be direct destruction or removal? You are proposing to demolish a building, or is it indirect and unintended? By virtue of vibrations, we're going to expect people to consider, could pile driving have an impact on neighboring structures that are heritage identified? So we provided this list of examples, and not just structural. We expect to see, are there new unsympathetic elements in the area if it's an area that has value, like Brant Avenue? Given these examples, we set out how we expect recommended conservation and mitigation measures to be shown. Consider the Parks Canada standards and guidelines. You see, me and my colleagues refer to these when we do our heritage permits. Does this meet the standards and guidelines? We'll be expecting that from the private sector as well. And then having clear, detailed recommendations that tie to these properties, and that's section 4.5, the recommended conservation mitigation measures. And then there's just the usual conclusion. What we expect to see from your additional content. If you're referring to other studies that we haven't seen before, they should be appended so that we can all review them. If the studies are part of the whole submission package, then that we already have a copy as part of the submission package. So some technical details like that. This is predominantly for development applications. If there's a city project like an environmental assessment, when we build like a new road or a stormwater pond, that report may be phased a little bit differently. So we also have some language in this terms of reference that says, yeah, you may break these apart sometimes. You have one study that looks at the history, and then when we know more, one study that takes that known quantifiable project and says, okay, now here are the impacts. So this will work for both private sector developers and for assisting staff in public works when they're doing an environmental assessment. The terms of reference for heritage impact assessments are longer because they have more components. When we go to the conservation plan, that's the very direct, right, now that we know the impacts, here are the explicit steps we're going to take to protect the property. So the start looks very similar, who can do it, same requirements, but the conservation plans will vary project to project because the impacts are always different. So we're not going to see the same level of background research in a conservation plan. It's a very functional document. We've acknowledged that there's heritage value, but here's how we're going to protect it. So we will expect to see condition considered. Is the building in good condition, or are there structural issues? Are there leaks? Is there roof repairs needed? Is the foundation crumbling? There should be photo documentation. They should consider the proposal too. What are the vulnerabilities? Again, vibrations, pile driving. It's a vulnerability, even if the building could be in good condition. So that's what we spell out in the conservation plan. What we expect to see with the conservation plan is they tell us, what's the recommended work? What is this specifically addressing? When does this work occur? Are there any special considerations? The easy example is special mortar. You don't go use Quikrete on an old building, you use a lime mortar. Are there any other conditions, other situations where this might be the case? Do we need any special qualifications for the professional doing the work? There should be a reasonably detailed cost estimate for a recommendation. We may also use these for securities from time to time. And then similarly, reference the appropriate studies, talk about a monitoring schedule. So these are the documents that we're preparing. The development manual has not been endorsed by council yet. We are working on many other guidelines or terms of reference for different kinds of studies, engineering studies, landscape studies, etc. These are two components, but because they're heritage related and they will form the baseline for the reports you see in the future, this is the Heritage Committee's opportunity to have reviewed the guidelines and provide comments. And then we will take those back, review them, address them, and then when the final conservation or the final development manual goes forward, that's one thing that you'll see addressed in the report is stakeholder consultation, how those comments were incorporated. Once adopted, again, when a heritage impact assessment comes in, we'd review it against our guidelines and say, did this meet our expectations on what this study is supposed to be? And in some cases where we see a huge discrepancy from what we expect and what's provided, it gives us that standing to say, this is not good enough to support your proposal. You need to go back and consider the heritage appropriately. And here's how. It's not conjecture. It's not, mistakes or misinterpretation of what, one person said versus another. It's a document that we can point to that is public. So I talked a lot, but that's the gist of the documents that were provided. I'm happy to answer questions of the committee about the way the documents were written.
Okay, any questions for Patrick? Tamara, I see your hand up.
All I can say is thank you. It's about time. I've seen Nathan go squirrely sometimes because of some of the reports that we've received from planners coming to us, and the fact that there's going to be some sort of standardization or a quality control on them that's great, just great. So thank you. a lot of work.
Any other questions for Patrick? Oh, sorry, I see Bev's hand there.
Quick question, what's your timeline for having both the HIA terms of reference and the conservation, these two components of the development manual completed?
Through the chair, I don't have that. It's not a project that my section is leading. It's with our development engineering group, because a lot of the studies are engineering studies or matters they look servicing capacity, geotechnical studies. We're providing the comments. I believe the hope was to have the first draft and going public, and it was originally going to be December. I think it may be early 2024.
Anything else, Bev?
Not a question, but I just take the opportunity to add to Tamara's enthusiasm. This is, am I sitting in Brantford? Like, there's been so many positive heritage, the permits, the grants, now the outline for HIAs. It's just really nice to see. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, I also am gonna echo those comments, right? Like, it's nice to see things laid out, and as well some of the issues that have come up in the past, you know, they are captured in this document as well. So he's done a very good job of building off of what the provincial standards were before the province abandoned us, and keeping those intact, as well as looking at what other municipalities are doing. The one question I think I have is, so there's two documents here, and the second one is the Heritage Conservation Plan. So I don't know that we've ever seen a Heritage Conservation Plan here at committee. Have we seen one? And like, are those things that will normally come to this committee?
Through the chair, I will admit they're not as commonly completed as heritage impact assessments. We've also seen them by other names. I'm trying to think. The best one that came to mind was we had a few iterations of study done for before the Crystal Cottage move, and I don't recall if they were titled conservation plan. We had the heritage impact assessment, and then we had another document, but it wasn't what we would expect to see with this type of conservation plan, like the actual full timing that other municipalities would secure through either their terms of reference or just through different conditions. We have imposed conditions for conservation plans, but at that point, it's still up to developers to work towards clearing that condition. I also imagine if we start seeing them, we may start seeing a number of them come in, you know, all of a sudden, because that's the stage of development. They've finally gotten to the stage of clearing conditions and preparing those studies. A conservation plan is more after the approval, but right before the building permit, because they need to know the building they're going to install. They're going to have to be able to quantify those impacts on the historic building. So we have taken them. I think maybe another example where we've imposed the requirement would be Morton and West Street. I think 477 West. So a conservation plan is a condition of the holding removal. So before the building permit could go ahead. That's just the one that pops into my mind. So I think we will see them soon, reasonably soon. In the old document, I don't know if we had these in the old official plan. It's something I made sure, working with Alan for the new official plan, was something that we clearly referenced.
So then can you clarify that? Sorry, we're as a committee going to start seeing these in our agendas as well, and
Yes.
then we have an opportunity to comment on it just like we would an HIA.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. That's great. So any other questions for Patrick on this? Seeing none, we have a motion. Now there's comments attached to that motion. So unless if people have a comment that they want to include, we can definitely do that. But if not, then we can just have a motion to receive. So any person wanting to make a comment on this?
Acknowledge support. Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
Acknowledge support.
acknowledge the support of the heritage impact assessment and the heritage conservation plans. Okay. Any other comments? So then we would need a mover and a seconder for that comment. I see Linda and Councillor Sullivan. Any discussion on this? Our one comment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Declare that carried. We'll now move on to 4.4, which is our Heritage Committee priorities for the following year. Patrick, you want to give us a quick overview of this?
Sure, through the chair, I thought these were your priorities, reports from prior years.
In my roadmap, it says throw it over to Patrick. Okay, well, it's fine.
I will have to refer to historic examples next time Lisa and I have to prepare these priorities.
Yeah, so
I can speak to them. Yes, they are by and large, these are carry forwards because a lot of the projects are continuing. Some of you who've been at the committee for some time may just go, these look a bit different than before. We only changed the formatting to be AODA compliant, but the priorities are there to guide the Heritage Committee in fulfilling its mandate, which is in Chapter 26. So the priorities we in Appendix A. So number one, and these are not in priority sequence. That one is more important than four. It's just an order. So the alternatives, before it used to be the register project, now it's the alternatives. So we have the council direction to consider Part 4 designations and the districts, which we discussed last month. So our goal one is just to complete sufficient research to recommend 2 to 3 properties a year be designated by council. And again, that's the level of research that we can actually comfortably take forward a recommendation and have that background. Ultimately, it's always council's decision. Report back to council on the results of public consultation for districts. So again, staff will do the coordinating. We typically see with these, what's the project, what's our goals, what's staff's involvement versus the committees, and then what's our remaining budget. So in this case, we have about $25,000. That's just remaining in a dedicated account. So, but that's our first priority or the committee's first priority. Priority 2 was sustaining Prominence Point. Again, that was a recent matter we saw, a recommendation going to council, and that actually will be considered tomorrow night by council. So in this case, I've looked at new quotes for work, and we will have to request an increased budget compared to prior years. That accounts for any of the plaque sizes that we have. We have 3 different size plaques: 1 meter long, 2 meter long, and 3 meter long. And etching costs have gone up, as has the fuel surcharge for shipping. So we're now going to be, as a planning department, requesting $7,650, up from $5,000 from council to actually etch the plaques and install them. That should allow for a little bit of money left over for inauguration ceremonies or unveiling ceremonies. The one we've seen before, the development of the committee, which is attending the Ontario Heritage Conference. This allows members to be nominated to go to the Ontario Heritage Conference each year. Unfortunately, this year we weren't able to increase the budget, so it will remain $1,500. That covers registration and hotel bookings. I believe this year, Nathan, it's in Gravenhurst, so we will, when the conference is coming up and we're looking at the booking, we will give you a breakdown of like a hotel. In other years, we've had to prorate this so that, if multiple members go, it may not be full reimbursement for everyone, but it does allow you to go with a significant contribution from the committee, not just your own finances. And if there are enough funds, then obviously it is fully covered by this budget. Priority 4 was the grant program, as we discussed last month, and I'm happy to say that Committee of the Whole did not separate it for discussion. It was carried by Committee of the Whole, so we expect council to approve it tomorrow night. We have the $42,000 remaining. Lastly, one that was added This was something we discussed in the grant report as staff, was looking at our procedures and hopefully finding ways to improve the process. So it's better for applicants and for the committee's time, that we can support homeowners. Not just a new priority, something that we will be working on in 2024. So those are the listed priorities, but ultimately this is something the committee can discuss. And if there are other priorities or things you may wish to look at, they can be raised or put on the docket maybe for further discussion so they go in the following year. So that's just the overview of Appendix A and the priorities. But yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. Any questions about the priorities? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you very much. So then can we have a mover and a seconder that the report be received and that the budget be utilized to undertake the priorities identified in the appendix? Councillor Sullivan, and I see Tamara's hand up there for a seconder. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried. Moving right along, we're now into consent items. So we have the minutes from our last meeting on November 27th as part of our agenda. Any errors or omissions that anyone noticed? And if not, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Okay, I see Greg, and Greg was there. No, Greg wasn't there. Or he's
So
not.
just for clarity, you do not have to be in attendance to move the minutes. The minutes belong to the committee as a whole.
Okay, thank you. So moved by Greg, seconded by Councillor Sullivan then. Any further discussion on the minutes? See none. Oh, sorry, Greg.
I was present at the last meeting. I missed October's.
I think I actually captured that this afternoon. So there should be a correction in the online version. I don't know that it made it into your agenda package.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's perhaps why I was so confused. So noting that correction, any other discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried. Okay. There are no resolutions. There is one notice of motion, and I am going to vacate the chair for that notice of motion.
So since we don't have a vice chair present, without objection from the committee, I'm going to ask our former vice chair, Tamara Capoli, to take over chairing unless there is objection from the committee. Seeing no objection, Tamara, go ahead.
Nathan, I understand you have a motion that you would like to waive the rules. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. It's a motion to waive the rules because there is no notice given to this motion, so it needs a 2/3 majority in order for us to discuss it in accordance with the municipal code.
And do you have a seconder for your motion? Bev will second. You can, did everybody read the motion?
You're calling the vote, sorry?
Oh, no, just read the motion.
Oh.
All right, there you go. Just make sure everybody read it.
Okay, that's sections 15.11.5 and 15.11.6 of Chapter 15 of the City of Brantford Municipal Code be waived in order to introduce the following resolution without prior notice of motion and deemed the item urgent in order to be considered outside of the budget process.
Perfect. And Bev is seconding it. Any discussion? Questions, concerns? No? Can we have a vote? Show of hands for approving it? Cynthia's up. Linda? Hands? Okay, all right, unanimous. Carried. Perfect.
Okay, so I'll read the motion now. That the position of committee member Pawinder Singh of the Brantford Heritage Committee be declared vacant in accordance with section 26.2.12 of chapter 26 of the City of Brantford Municipal Code, and that the appointments committee be requested to fill the vacant position. And I know that we have problems with quorum here sometimes, and the absence of a member sometimes has impacts on the committee. So hopefully this will allow us to get a committee member here that's committed.
Do we have a seconder for your motion? Counselor Sullivan, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? And carried, thank you. Back to you, Nathan.
Okay, I just went into my email to get the right thing out, so now I have to go back to my other email.
Want me just to adjourn it?
I think that's all we got to do. Yes, we are at that point of the meeting where I can adjourn and wish everyone a great season over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully you get to spend some good time relaxing, spending time with family, and we'll hit the ground running in January. Thank you everyone for your commitment.
Happy holidays, everyone.